Hello everyone, welcome back to I Create For You. My name's Lori and I have a different book we're going into today. It's Civil War Ghost Stories. It's a very big book and with very big, long stories. I tried to pick out the shortest ones and we'll get started with Ghost Train to Freedom. The Underground Railroad was an informal network established by anti-slavery activists in the northern states to assist fugitive slaves, concealing them from slave hunters, bounty hunters, and the authorities until the runaways reached the safety of the Canadian border. This clandestine support network was first established in the 1790s, and by the time of the Civil War, many thousands of fugitives were spirited away by supporters. The success of movement provided useful publicity for the cause, and despite the best efforts of many, the Underground Railroad continued to develop, its activities reaching a peak during the decade preceding the outbreak of the war. One of the best known clients of the Underground Railroad was Harriet Tubman, who escaped from slavery in Maryland in 1849, and then, as a conductor, she made over 15 trips back to the South to help others escape to freedom along the railroad. Those who benefited from her efforts included her own siblings, who were brought out of Maryland and moved to Canada during the early 1850s. While many thousands of runaway slaves reached safety, others were not so fortunate. Some were caught and turned over to the authorities, while others were recaptured by slave hunters. In some areas, lynch mobs and local vigilantes forced the runaways to pay the ultimate price for their quest for freedom. Many of the ghost stories emanating from the Underground Railroad are founded on incidents where the escape went horribly wrong, or when those providing the stations of refuge were uncovered and persecuted for their activities. One of the most celebrated railroad sites that has long had a ghostly association is Woodburn, the official residence of the governor of Delaware, near Dover. The land on which the house was built was purchased by landowner Charles Hilliard in 1784, and by 1798 Woodburn served as his family home. Following Hilliard's death in 1814, the house passed on into the hands of his son-in-law, Senator Bates, whose family sold the property in 1825. The new owner, Daniel Cowgill, passed the house on to his children, and it was later transferred to his granddaughter's husband, Edward Wilson, whose family retained the house into the early 20th century. Woodburn passed through several more hands before being purchased by the state of Delaware in 1965 and becoming the official residence of Governor Charles L. Terry. By that time, it had a widely spread reputation for being haunted. According to legend, the ghost of the original owner, Charles Hilliard, still haunts his former mansion. He first appeared in front of a house guest a year after his death. It is also claimed that if a glass of wine is left out downstairs during the night, by morning the glass will have been emptied. However, the wife of Governor Sherman W. Tribbett tested the theory and reported finding no trace of the wine-drinking ghost. A second ghost associated with Woodburn was that of a small girl rumored to appear in the grounds wearing a gingham dress and bonnet and carrying a candle. More importantly for our story, a large tulip poplar tree on the south lawn of Woodburn has long been associated with the ghost of a runaway slave. Although the ancient tree was removed in 1998, it had long been notable for its size and hollowed-out interior. Legend has it that during the 1850s, when Woodburn belonged to the Cowgill family, a runaway slave was being chased by a party of slave hunters and took refuge in the grounds of the Woodburn. On discovering the tree, he hid himself inside it, only to be tracked down by the dogs of his pursuers. The runaway slave was killed, and according to the story, screams could still be heard occasionally. What weakens this story is that they have often been heard on Halloween, a date that would have meant little to either the slave or his pursuers, and that owes its popularity to the trick-or-treat boom of the mid-20th century. No ghostly screams have been reported since the remains of the dead man's tree were removed. Another version of the story claims that local slave hunting vigilantes laid siege to Woodburn but were driven off by the Cowgill family and their servants. One attacker hid in the branches of the poplar but slipped from his perch. The story goes that his beard caught in a tree and he passed by accidental hanging. No evidence has been found to support either tale. However, the location itself has a far more tangible link to the movement. The Harriet Tubman Society records Woodburn as a station on the Underground Railroad during the 1840s and 1850s, when the property was owned by Daniel Cowgill. Tales persist of a secret tunnel running from a hidden room in the basement under the gardens to the nearby St. John's River. From there, boats would transport runaway slaves to the Delaware River, then north to safety. Though no trace of the tunnel has survived, it is probable that the Cowgills placed their part in the Underground Railroad during those antebellum years. A somewhat less wholesome site associated with the Underground Railroad ghost is found near Parsons, West Virginia, a tall, rugged hill known as Darkish Knob. One of the many routes used by runaway slaves lay through the mountains of the western part of Virginia, an area where slave owning was generally viewed with distaste, and that ceded from Virginia in 1861 to form the new state of West Virginia. Parson lay astride one of those mountain routes, and a small cabin hidden in the woods and tumbled boulders beneath the Darkish Knob was reportedly a secret station on the Underground Railroad where runaway slaves could find temporary refuge. According to legend, one such runaway was a young girl, mounted on a horse, who was being pursued by a group of slave hunters. In the darkness, she misread the directions to the cabin and followed the trail up Darkish Knob instead. As she approached the summit, her horse lost its footing, and both horse and rider plunged down into the ravine of the Cheat River, where they were dashed on the rocks and expired. According to the tale, her pursuers were a mile behind her and heard a long scream that ended abruptly. The story goes that on the anniversary of her death, the girl's spirit returns to the cliff top, then cries in fear for several minutes before it lets out her long final scream. Like so many ghost stories, the tale is full of ambiguities, and no hard evidence for either the cabin or the slave girl has ever been forthcoming. Well, it makes a good ghost story. The tale could be a concocted one, or else why do they have these freaking words in here? Apocryphal tale based on some other event and retold to serve the needs of a new audience. A similar tale centers on another cabin used as a railroad resting place, this time outside Fairmount, West Virginia, close to the Buchanan I think I need to go back to bed. Buchanan River, and some 30 miles northwest of the cabin beneath Darkish Knob. A group of runaway slaves were hidden in the cabin when it was surrounded and attacked by a group of local vigilantes. According to the local West Virginia legend, the attackers killed the slaves and cut off their heads. Oh my goodness. Leaving the bodies where they lay and taking the heads to the nearby river and throwing them in. The owner of the cabin buried the headless victims in his family plot, but since then, ghostly lights have been seen coming from the cabin and its immediate vicinity. Naturally, this was explained away as the ghosts of the dead searching for their missing heads. Once again, there seems to be no historic evidence to support such an event, but the persistence of the legend suggests that this ghastly deed, or something like it linked to the Underground Railroad, may well have taken place near Fairmount in the decade before the Civil War began. An equally disturbing ghost tale emerged from Millington, New Jersey, an important switch area on the Underground Railroad where runaway slaves could either be led northwest to the Canadian border or northeast toward New York and New England. Today, a monument celebrates the local activities of the Underground Railroad, although less tangible reminders have also been reported. Several engineers working on the railroad tracks that curve around Millington reported seeing the figures of a tall black man standing on the tracks near where they crossed the Passaic River. The figure was described as wearing a large cloak or robe. A similar figure was seen by local residents standing on the old rail bridge that goes over the river. One of these locals added the detail that the man carried a wooden staff and had red, bloodshot eyes. According to local legend, a group of Millington residents held a seance that conjured up the ghost of the man who gave his name as Yagu, a freed slave conductor on the Underground Railroad who reportedly led groups under the railroad bridge under cover of darkness so they could reach a safe haven in Millington. During the first decade of the 19th century, several residents of nearby Oaks Road claimed that they were repeatedly visited by ghostly apparitions. The figures of runaway slaves walking east from the railroad bridge toward the center of town. Since then, the ghost of Yagu has occasionally been sighted, but no more large-scale sightings were reported. Two more haunted sites found in Washington, D.C., where two historic houses became closely associated with the Underground Railroad and the ghosts of those runaway slaves who passed through their portholes. On the corner of New York Avenue and 18th Street Northwest stands the Octagon House, which was once the home of President Madison while the White House was being rebuilt after it was burned by the British in 1814. Madison's wife Dolly is supposed to have so loved the place that she returns there to dance and smell the lilacs. Although Dolly Madison has long been associated with the house, and as have the ghostly daughters of the building's first owner, the most commonly reported sightings of the former slaves. Legend has it that the tunnels led into the basement of the house from the Potomac River, and these were used to spirit away slaves into the heart of the city without risk of being detected. The voices of these former slaves have reportedly been heard in the house, while the story of another slave who was killed and buried in a wall has been used to explain other strange noises, sobs, and the sound of knocking on a wall. While all these ghostly tales may have some explanation, no trace of the tunnel system has ever been found, making it unlikely that the Octagon House played a major part in the Underground Railroad. The current owners of the building, the American Institute of the Architecture, have never claimed any ghostly happenings in the house at all. Since they have been in residence for just over a century, it seems that if any ghosts were once associated with the house, then they no longer trouble the residents of the building. In Georgetown, Halkin House, or Housen, wow, that's an odd name for a house. Housen House was built by the first Secretary of the Navy, Benjamin Stoddard, in 1783. The modest building forming the heart of his pretty Prospect estate was added to over the years until it bore little resemblance to its original form. It now stands on the junction of Prospect and 34th Street Northwest, although its front door still faces the river, reflecting Stoddard's maritime interests. During the decade before the Civil War, the house became an important staging post or station in the Underground Railroad. Built close to the Potomac River, the house provided shelter for runaway slaves who were able to swim across from the Virginia River bank. A drainage tunnel connected the house A drainage tunnel connected the house to the riverbank, which provided easy access for the runaways, so that the other inhabitants of Georgetown were unaware that Halkin House was a safe haven for slaves. I apologize if that's not the right pronunciation. The river crossing was hazardous, especially in winter, and many runaway slaves failed to reach the far shore and the safety of that house. Others were reputedly so traumatized by their exertions that they expired from fatigue or exposure in the basement of the house itself. Over the years, there have been numerous reports that the sound of moaning or people moving around has been heard coming from the basement, and this has been credited to the ghosts of ailing or dying runaway slaves, expiring at their first station on the road to freedom. It was reported that in the first decade of the 20th century, the family who owned the house decided to block up the tunnel as rats were entering the house from the river. The builder who set about the task was alarmed when he heard cries and weeping coming from the tunnel and the basement around him. After he bricked up the tunnel entrance, he began plastering over the wall, but he froze when he heard a sudden scream from the far side of the newly blocked tunnel. He fled, leaving his tools where they lay, and never returned. These supposed slave ghosts were not the only supernatural association with the house. In the 1930s, it was sold to Albert Clemens, who convinced himself that if he kept adding to the house, he would never die. Consequently, he added pointless walls and a staircase leading nowhere, as well as additional rooms and wings to the house. Despite all his best efforts, he duly died at the fairly ripe old age. His ghost is still reported to roam the corridors of the house, as is that of a mysterious, faceless woman. Incidentally, just a few blocks away on Wisconsin Avenue, patrons of a bar called Mr. Henry's have reputedly heard the ghosts of slaves singing and dancing. The slave quarters of an estate stood on the site during the first decades of the 19th century. It seems ironic that the ghosts of these slaves seem to have been enjoying a far more pleasant eternity than those who made their courageous break from freedom and tragically died in the attempt. And that's the end of that one. And they have kind of, I hope you could see them all, this is probably where that guy was blocking that, because that's the Underground Railroad underneath the house. There's the Octagon House, I believe. And I believe this is the lady who was the conductor, slavery conductor. I never heard of a woman, actually, I mean, not to say that there isn't any, but I've never heard of a woman railroad conductor. I'm pretty sure there is some, but it's just like back then you wouldn't, and to be a black one at that is a big accomplishment, I would think. Okay, I'm going to try to draw, the only thing that really stood out to me that I thought was unique was that tree, the dead man's tree that was in the yard with this big hollowed out area. There are so many ghosts mentioned in here, but I just wanted to try to do that tree and the one that they man, the one that the guy, the slave, hidden, but was actually found. If it wasn't for the dogs, he probably wouldn't have been found. But you know, you got to take that chance, right? When it means freedom. And some people haven't had to worry about that, worrying about those kind of things. So yeah, it's just sad. I know where I live now. I live in Pennsylvania, and supposedly the town I live in is supposed to have underground railroad in some of the houses and businesses. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wish that we have a historic society here, and I wish that, you know, I'd like to go once they're building a new building right up the street from me. But I'd like to go there and see if they have anything about, you know, the Underground Railroad. I know we have a lot of, which is unusual, but we have a lot of fallout shelters that I've seen, and they're actually labeled. So if you go through our town, you can see like on some of the big factories and businesses, there is a fallout shelter sign on the building, which is pretty unique, I think, because I've not seen it in other places. Not that I was even looking, though. I mean, it, I could be wrong, and it actually could have that in other towns and stuff. But it's just that I have not ever seen or heard of that. Do you know if your town may have had one, or were they part of, depending on where you live, were there parts of the Underground Railroad um, in your town? I mean, like, I did hear about that here somewhere, and if I ever find out, I'm going to look into it more, because I could have sworn when I was a kid in school that I heard about it, because like, talk in our um, history classes, that our history teachers would talk about stuff like that, and you know I thought, wow, that's just freaking interesting, actually. I'd like to know, like, what if you actually lived in one of those houses and didn't even know it? But yeah, I've kind of seen and heard things in this town that have been, like, piqued my interest, especially those um, fallout shelters. I really like to see what one looks like, and how big they are, and who, I mean, like, who built them, and how many people can fit in there, and is there actually any kind of plan for people in this town to to uh, actually be able to go in there if something would happen? So many questions, so many, and there's not a lot of people here who have been here since the beginning, since, well, of course not, since um a lot of this stuff has come up in classrooms. I don't even know if they even teach that anymore, about how they have the fallout shelters and underground railroad systems and stuff like that. I don't even know that that's even talked about anymore, because I know when it was a big deal, because our teachers really love to talk about different things like that, especially when it coincide with the town that you're living in. This is a very bad looking tree, but it's as good as it's gonna get at 7 o'clock in the morning. I am just, like, super tired. I've been up since 5. Hence the bad pronunciation of these words. Oh my goodness, I'm having such a day already, and of course it's Monday, so it should be um, expected. You know what I mean? Things happening way, getting out of control, or stumbling start of a new week, and people are going back to work now after their big holiday. So yeah, it's crazy. So this is how I'm just going to go about doing the tree. And I'm sorry if it looks messy or doesn't look good, but this is just how I'm going to do it. Because, I always like to use my big blender to get the effects. And so I'm going to just make this the tree's hole. But I'm going to do something else in here, because, he's supposed to be hiding in here, right? So I have something I want to use. I want to see if it'll work. make it look so. I'm going to try this method, see if this makes it look a little bit more hollow. Putting that in there, it's a little bit more of a inside the thing. Okay, now there's a hollow of the tree, and I'm going to use my handy dandy electric eraser, and I'm going to just put like little eyes in here in the tree to make it look like he's looking out. So I'm going to make these a little more prominent as eyes, and then I will show you up close and personal. That's him peering out. He's hiding in that hole. There he is peering out. So that is my interpretation of the dead man's tree, and I'm trying to get you guys back. It won't let me back you back up. Holy moly. Typical Monday. There we go. Alrighty. And there you have it. The first story in the Civil War ghost stories. Hopefully they won't be as long and crazy with words like that first one. I don't really normally read it first. I usually skip to where there's ghosts and read about the different ghosts and what they would look like, and that's how I get my idea for the illustrations. So I didn't really read this through. I just like skipped here and there when I saw the word ghost. I read that paragraph to see what that one was about, to try to figure out, to just pick one, because these men have kind of a lot of different ghostly what's the word I want to use? Ghostly apparitions, or ghostly whatever. Right now I am so tongue-tied, it's pathetic, and I am so sorry for rambling on. Please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. Comment if you'd like to. Let me know if you ever heard of any of those, the Underground Railroad or anything like that in your town or your area, or if you've actually saw buildings with this in it. Alrighty. Hope you have a great Monday. I shall catch you guys in the next video. I'm going to be putting a short up today. Since it's Monday, I think I do it Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Wednesday is still going to be whatever Wednesday, which I might not be doing a ghost story. I'll do whatever else I can find and just do something different on a Wednesday, just to break it up a bit. And I shall see you then. Bye-bye.